Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special episode of MMO Weekly presented by Chitty Cheesesteaks. Obviously, as you can tell, there's been some major news that has just broken as the time of us recording this. And obviously, you can also see us with our giant smile on our faces. Superstar outfielder Juan Soto has signed a 15-year, $765 million contract. It is currently the biggest professional deal in sports currently. It is the largest anyone has ever gotten. And apparently, Jeff Passan is reporting that there is no deferred money and has escalators that can have it go all the way up to 800 million. I am here with executive editor Mike Mayer, who is in Dallas right now. Mike, how you doing? How's the vibe out there? How are you feeling about all this?
I'm doing good. I mean, most of the day was pretty quiet. I mean, there was some people for some of the news crews that were getting some sleep in earlier because there's just nothing going on. And technically, really, the meetings really start tomorrow when like everyone's supposed to get here and there's announcements and stuff. But the Mets decided to jump the gun and get the meetings really started with signing one of the best players on the planet. Yeah, I talked about it on the podcast the last episode that I just always felt that Steve Cohen just wasn't going to be outbid. Um,
Mhm.
the Yankees came in at 16 years, 750 million, so less money, and it was lower AAV, obviously, over the 16 years. So Steve Cohen really kind of blew them out of the water with his offer. And like you said, there's no deferrals. So that's a pretty big deal too that he was able to get this done without needing to defer any money. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, you can't. I'm kind of still like again. I thought the Mets were going to do this because it just felt like Steve Cohen wasn't going to get beat for Juan Soto. But it's look, as someone who's covered the Mets and grew up a Mets fan, days like this haven't happened. I mean, really ever.
Mhm.
That they've
Right.
almost always missed out on that big superstar, whether it's from Alex Rodriguez, Ken Griffey Jr., Barry Larkin. There was all these names that they were close to getting or hoped that they were going to get, and now they finally have the ownership in place that kind of gives them the big edge. And let's not forget, I mean, Soto's not just coming to the Mets for the money, which obviously is the biggest deal, but the Mets are
Mhm.
in a real good spot. They were a couple of games away from going to the World Series last year. And this just, I mean, signals that they're going to be on this plan of winning, hope to win for a very, I mean, you have Soto for potentially 15 years. There is an opt out after 5 years, and we don't have the full details on that yet. But as it looks right now, Juan Soto is going to be a Met for a very long time, and just putting him alongside Francisco Lindor is one of the best 1-2 punches in baseball.
Right. And you look at the way the team is currently constructed, and adding a bat like Soto kind of turns that lineup into really a dynamic offering of hitters because you have Lindor who could potentially lead off, and then you have Juan Soto who is a very high on base guy with a lot of power. You have Vientos with a lot of power, and possibly with the potential return of Pete Alonso if he does so choose to come back, then I really think this lineup is really well rounded. But you touched on Mike about the Mets missing out on the big name. The only time I can honestly remember the Mets ever really, somewhat stealing someone away from the Yankees and getting a big fish was Carlos Beltran, who signed that 7 years, $160 million contract. So you alluded to it a little bit, but bringing a guy like Soto in to this team, to this franchise, what does it mean for the Mets as a whole? Just as sort of like they're standing in New York, they're standing in Major League Baseball, and especially in comparison to the Yankees, because let's be real, we get called little brother a lot. So getting a guy like this, like Juan Soto, this incredible dynamic bat, what does this mean for the franchise as a whole in terms of just moving forward and delivering what Mets fans have been wanting for so long?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. This isn't just the Mets getting a superstar. This is the Mets essentially taking away a superstar from the Yankees too. So that's obviously a big deal and something that I mean, can you even think of happening in the Wilpon era? Like it, just
No.
something that really in this race would have never happened if the Wilpons were still here. So I think this was for me always the moment where Steve Cohen could finally really be like, hey, this is my bankroll, and I'm just going to pay whatever I need to do to get us this superstar. And I think that just not only sends a message to the Yankees, but kind of sends a message to the rest of the league, right? Like, if there's a guy that I want and he wants to play in New York, I'm going to do whatever I can to get him. And that certainly gets even scarier in the minds of other owners.
Mhm.
And to your point about Pete Alonso, too, I think that's kind of the next piece we have to talk about is um, I know other teams are certainly going to want Pete Alonso. The Yankees are probably very much going to want Pete Alonso, but I think the Mets are also going to really want Pete Alonso. And if you can add him to this lineup, that just it gets scary. I mean,
Mhm.
that's when you have Lindor, Soto, Vientos, and potentially Alonso. That I think is probably the best 1 through 4 in baseball. So and look, this is going to be super enticing for Alonso too, right? Like, why wouldn't he want to come back to the Mets, which I'm sure he already did, but to see that the Mets got one of the best players in baseball and he could be a part of that lineup, you have to wonder if the Mets can get another deal done with Boris.
Right. And, like you alluded to, bringing Alonso back into the fold would definitely be something huge for this lineup. And I'm still trying to reel myself in because as you can tell, I'm a little, you're not supposed to say this kind of stuff. I'm a little disheveled still because the news just kind of happened. But one of the things I wanted to mention, though, obviously, this is the biggest contract anybody has ever gotten in any sport, right? So just kind of take me on your thought process or opinion on how this whole process ended up coming out, because the lead up was either he was going to do it, we saw stuff that he was either going to do it immediately or he was going to take his time. Clearly, he took his time. The timing they said was going to happen at the winter meetings. Clearly, Sunday night it happened. And obviously, you also had teams like the Blue Jays, the Yankees, of course, and the Red Sox who were also in the bidding. So, just in your opinion about this whole process, take me through what you think about how this happened. What do you think was going through the minds of either Boris, Juan Soto, or even, Steve Cohen, and how you think we ended up getting here after all this? Because it seems like it's been madness. You had a lot of fake news coming in. I'm gonna try not to use that term as much, but you had a lot of fake reports coming out. You know, people trying to be the one to beat, the breaking news and all that. What has been your thought process of just this whole thing in general?
Yeah, I think um, Boris wanted to be very meticulous in how this kind of played out. He had kind of a up and down off season last year with some of his players signing late and not getting the contracts they wanted. But I mean, he knew Soto was probably going to be set up for this type of deal. And he knew the players too. Like he knew going into the offseason that the Yankees were going to want to spend a lot of money and that Steve Cohen was going to be a big bidder here. So he knew that he was going to be meticulous in this and not rush this and kind of let it play out. And I mean, I know it's talked about like when the first meetings happen that all the other teams met with um, Soto in hotel rooms, and Cohen had him over to one of his houses on the West Coast. And
Hmm.
I think that's just kind of part of that feel of Cohen is making sure that these players know that he's not just willing to spend all this money, which is obviously true, but he obviously wants to make sure that the players know that he's invested in them as people too, and that they are people to him. And that's what you do by having that touch of having them come to your house and meet with your family and stuff. And look, I mean, it's a just a huge win for the Mets all around, and I'm sure we'll discuss it more in the coming days. And I think, I mean, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the Mets aren't going to stop here. I mean, this is just kind of in the middle of their offseason. They've signed 2 starting pitchers so far,
Hmm.
but even if it's not Alonso, I think they're absolutely going to sign another bat that can either play first base or third base. Definitely going to sign another starting pitcher, and they haven't done a ton in the bullpen yet. So I think they're still going to get a couple of bullpen pieces too. So this is kind of this is the biggest win, but I think the Mets are going to keep adding to what they believe is a team that can win now and win for a long time with Juan Soto.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about opening the floodgates now that this is finished, and I'm assuming now that you're there, you're probably going to see a lot more action go on within the next 24 hours. Obviously, I'm sure, like you said, Boris doesn't want a repeat of the last season. So, in looking at Soto, right, and how he's set up for the team, right? Um, What do you think the Mets will do with him? I know this is kind of a preliminary question, but now you kind of have to think about where he will go either in the lineup or where he would play in the field. Obviously, he's a right fielder, but we've seen him have some defensive limitations. I mean, that's kind of been known, but his bat has been probably one of the more elite bats in Major League Baseball that you can kind of live with that. So, being that the contract is so long, do you think that at least towards or around when the opt out comes out within the next couple of years, or maybe even if he doesn't opt out, do you see maybe a transition for maybe full-time DH, or maybe he takes another, he plays in left field because it seems to be a bit an easier position for him? What do you think the trajectory for Juan Soto is as a Met? Now, I know we'll talk about this more down the line, but I guess in a preliminary sense, how do you think it will pan out for him as a Met in New York City?
Yeah, I think you kind of just worry about the here and now, and obviously he's going to play a lot of right fields, and always DH him when you need to. I don't think the Mets are good chance that they don't end up with like someone who's just a strict DH for this year or whatever. But yeah, I mean that's the thing with Juan Soto is that even if he is a DH in year 7 and on in that contract, he's such a good hitter that is still going to bring a ton of value at DH and likely going to be the best DH in baseball. So I think wherever he ends up playing at, even at the end of this contract, that he's just one of those guys that's going to age well as a hitter. That's just the type of hitter he is. I mean, we're talking about a guy in 2024 that still for his career has more walks than strikeouts. And
Mhm.
that's just an insane thing to think about in this era of baseball.
Hmm. Right. And you know, it just blows my mind that you know, he's been able to hold up so well over the years. Obviously, he started early with the Washington Nationals, playing left field, funny enough, with Bryce Harper being in right. And then his second year in, he wins a World Series with the Washington Nationals in 2019. And then obviously we saw his performance with the Yankees last season. So I want to get your opinion on this. So it was reported obviously earlier in the offseason that he was going for the most money, right? Now that we've seen that decision happen, obviously, how much stock do you think the reports of him wanting to stay with the Yankees because he was comfortable really had in negotiations in terms of like what he wanted to do? Because it seems like there was kind of a jostling of back and forth, and Hal actually did a really good job at getting to that point. But how much of him having played with the Yankees last season kind of influenced Hal Steinbrenner to really get to the 760 mark um, as the contract offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. I think Hal certainly felt more pressure to get to where he did because Soto had already played for the Yankees and they'd already seen what he had done and seen how close they got to winning a World Series. And quite honestly, I was kind of surprised that the Yankees went that high. I honestly did not think that the Yankees at some point, I didn't think that they would get over 700 million. And I'm sure Boris made it pretty clear that they weren't, any team wasn't going to be in the conversation unless they got to that 700 million point at some time. And, but that, I mean, there's no second place in something like this, right? So
Nope.
I know it kind of felt like the Yankees and even the Red Sox have already, over the last couple of days, had already kind of put out some of the we tried stuff and the backup
Hmm.
plan stuff. And
Yeah.
that's not really something that you got from the Mets end because I think from the get go, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, everyone in that front office, I think they were very confident in their chances of landing Juan Soto. And I mean, I, I there's certainly a lot of stuff put out there positive from the Yankee side of, oh, if it's close, he'll probably choose the Yankees. And I look, there's a lot of reporting on this, and
Hmm.
most of it wasn't correct because people were mostly guessing, and it was people that really don't have any sources that were guessing. So we got to this point where, especially from the Mets side, that it was mostly pretty quiet, and they just went about their business and made sure that they landed their guy. I mean, we know that Steve Cohen and Scott Boras have done a lot of stuff together already. They've done a lot of negotiation just with them themselves. So I'm sure Boras feels very confident in his ability to hammer out something like this with Cohen. And look, that's only. I know a lot of fans don't like Scott Boras, but he's he's always going to have some of the top talent. And
Hmm.
for him and Steve Cohen to have a great relationship where they can work deals out like this is certainly a bonus for the Mets for now and for the future.
Right. And obviously, we saw it in the Correa. I call it a fiasco, but you saw it with the Correa situation and some other Boris clients that have come to the Mets as well. It seems like there's been a bit of a shift with Cohen and Boris than it was with the Wilpons and Boris. And I guess we'll touch on this one last thing. So you look at Steve Cohen and the way him and David Stearns operate, and almost throughout this whole process, there were no leaks. Most of the stuff that came out came from the Red Sox, the Yankees, even the Toronto Blue Jays. Now we could sit here and debate about contract offers, and we could sit here and talk about the Canadian tax dollar and all this stuff that's been leaking out, whether it's from Rogers Corporation or Yankees, Red Sox. But there was virtually nothing from the Mets. It kind of seemed that was the consistent pattern throughout this whole negotiation process. So just kind of get into the difference between how this organization operates now with Steve Cohen and with David Stearns than it was maybe, let's say, even 7 years ago. Give me some insight on how much more cleaner I'd say it is with Steve Cohen at the helm and David Stearns at the helm than it was in times past.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is actually the new is David Stearns and kind of what he's implemented because even in the early Cohen days, there was actually quite a bit of leaks from when they had some other GMs in place that are no longer with the team. And I think Steve Cohen's also learned too, right? Like we've know Steve Cohen has in his early days was pretty active on Twitter and I'm sure pretty active in talking to some reporters, journalists behind closed doors too. And I think he's kind of learned that, hey, it's much better off if I kind of keep this stuff close to my vest. And and I'm sure David Stearns and him have had conversations about that. And look, it's a good thing, and it gets it so you don't get a lot of that we tried stuff out there. And I mean, it's just it's just another thing that shows you how crazy of a difference this organization is now compared to what it was in the Wilpon era, and all of its good changes, that's for sure.
Hmm. Right. Well, where do we go going forward now? The Mets landed their big fish, and obviously, what else is there to say? Obviously, we'll definitely have more going through this upcoming week, obviously, with Mike being there. Thank you very much, Mike, for going out there and doing this, of course. And we'll definitely have more from the winter meetings on MMO. But thank you, everyone, for watching this 100th episode of MMO Weekly presented by Chitty Cheesesteaks. Juan Soto's a Met. What else can we say?